Hi everybody, and welcome to another SANDCRAFT DIY installation. Today we're going to be installing a complete drive shaft and carrier bearing assembly on the Maverick R 2 and 4-seat Max. Alright, so step one is going to be disconnecting the front drive line at the differential, and we're progressively going to work our way back until all sections are loose. So we're going to remove the two 13mm nut and bolt at the pinch clamp at the front. The next step is to actually remove the driver's seat from its position by removing the two front 13mm nut and bolts and the rear 18mm. Once all of that hardware is removed, I like to lift the seat up and set it on the steering column. Now with the seat belt in perfect view, we can go ahead and note that the tab is bent outwards and remove it so we can remove the seat for ease of access. We're going to remove one plastic push rivet from below the accelerator pedal and remove the driver's side front kick panel. Now we're going to disconnect the electrical connectors and vent hose from the four-wheel drive clutch. Now we're going to remove the rear section of the front drive shaft hardware and the front section of the rear drive shaft hardware. I was lucky that the drive shaft landed in this position to where I could remove all of the hardware. But if it is not the case for you, then you have to turn the ignition on, put the transmission in neutral, and actually roll the vehicle forward or backward to expose the hardware to a good removal position. Now we're going to pull the passenger side inner kick panel, but before doing so, you have to pull the plastic rivets and 3 Torx from the knee bolster on the passenger side, then the inner kick panel, and that will expose your four-wheel drive clutch. So now we're going to thread the needle between the two radiator hoses and remove the passenger side mounting bolt for the four-wheel drive clutch, 15mm. So if you have a 2-seat, you can skip the next few steps, but being as how this vehicle is a Max, we have to remove both upper center consoles with the cup holders, and then 2 T30 bolts to expose the side panels, and that will completely reveal the Max carrier bearing. Now we're going to remove both passenger and driver's side mounting bolts for the carrier bearing, and then move on back towards the final driveline pinch bolts. So now we're here at the back of the Mav R to employ our special service tools, a lift plate and ratchet strap. And this is to remove the rearmost Rotax section of the drive shaft. And this applies for both the 2-seat and the Max. First, we're going to slide our jack plate underneath the engine transmission assembly, just positioned above one of the holes in the skid plate. And then we're going to align our jack and push rod, if you will, and give a little bit of an upward pressure on the engine and transmission assembly as a whole. First, we're going to remove the driver's side front motor mount from underneath the turbo, all 15mm bolts mounting to the frame and the mount to the engine. Now we're going to undo the front passenger side motor mount by the oil filter housing, just the mounting bolt to the frame though. Now we're moving on to the rear transmission mount, just the main mount to frame bolt. And from my experience, this one can be a real bear cat, but it will come loose. I place my ratchet strap just over the top of the transmission mount underneath the muffler and go around the rear of the frame just above the sway bar, and that's a nice pulling point to slide everything backward. I like to use a combination of lift and then crank, pulling the engine and transmission assembly backward, lift, and then crank it tight, lift and crank it tight, until you'll feel where it actually finds a snug little stopping point. Once the two 15mm mounting bolts for the four-wheel drive clutch are removed, you can compress the front drive shaft off of the front of the clutch, pushing the drive shaft aside, and then remove the clutch from the rear drive line. Now we can slide the carrier bearing mounted shaft forward to disconnect from the rear section, and then we'll push the rear section out of the way and disconnect the carrier bearing from the drive shaft. With all of the front shafts out of the way and the engine mount disconnected from both the frame and the engine,
You can slide the shaft forward out of the transmission and get enough wiggle room to slide the rear away from the transmission and then slip the mount out from under the turbo. And now you have plenty of room to remove the remaining sections of driveline from the rear of the vehicle.
All right, so what we have here is the unboxed Can-Am Max drive shaft, all the way from our Rotax rear, intermediate, and front shaft. We have our carrier bearing already installed on the shaft, and this is going to be our mounting base plate. So this kit is going to be different from the Max to the 2-seat versions, to where the 2-seat will not have the rear, intermediate, or the carrier bearing mounting hardware. It'll just be the 3-piece kit. You will need to transfer some parts and or remove this dust plate bushings. So the bushings do pop out by hand. We are going to save these, then we have to get behind this little dust plate here, and this will expose a snap ring. So right now I'm trying to add a little heat to this dust cover, get it to expand so it will slip off the shaft easier. All right, so before we install the shafts into the vehicle, we're actually going to mount our carrier bearing base plate. You want to pay attention for the arrow that indicates the top and facing the front of vehicle, so that the offset to the bearing is over to the driver's side of the vehicle to correct the driveline operating angle. We're just going to set that over in the factory location. We'll use some thread locker on our 17mm mounting hardware and tighten it down. So now we're going to start with the front half, sliding up through the channel towards the all-wheel drive clutch, starting with the set screws. Just before we install the rear Rotax shaft and engine mount bearing in the vehicle, we're going to slide the bearing over the shaft and reinstall the snap ring. With the shaft almost completely installed, I'm going to put the bushings back in the mount and then start threading the mount bolts to the engine case. Now that the Rotax drive shaft segment and motor mount are bolted back up to the engine installed, we're going to go ahead and lower the jack and reinstall our 2 motor mounts and transmission mount. So now we can reach just over the left mount and connect the front section to the Rotax section driveline. Now that we have the rear shaft installed all the way onto the Rotax, we're going to go and put the intermediate, if you will, connected to the carrier bearing at the rear. We're going to install the front section driveline with the short section attached to the differential, the long section towards the rear. So now we're going to put the front slip on the front differential and tighten down our set screws. Now we can go ahead and slip our 4-wheel drive clutch into position and connect it to the front shaft, and then we will pull our rear shaft to the 4-wheel drive clutch and connect it and tighten those as well. We can now install and tighten down all of the clutch mounting hardware with thread locker and also the driveline mounting hardware cinch screws, making sure that they land in the ringland of each spline shaft. With the clutch housing and splines tight, now we can connect the clutch electrical and vent hose again. And to button up the driveline section of this install, we're going to install the 2 bolts that go through the carrier bearing base plate to the carrier bearing housing using a 17mm wrench. And once your carrier bearing is tightened down all the way, you can add a couple of pumps of like a hydrophobic grease, something of that nature. Service it about every oil change. Every other oil change is fine. Other than that, that completes your driveline installation. Now you can go ahead and reinstall all of your plastic shrouds and panels, reinstall the seat and seat belt securely, and then you're good to go. Thanks for watching another SANDCRAFT DIY. Enjoy the ride.